Welcome to the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit, where articles come alive. You're listening to the audio version of our article. For the full text and an interactive experience, check out the link in the description below. Interact with any selection using our AI assistant to enhance your understanding. Let's explore.
Communication barriers in discourse analysis. Interactive assistant communication barriers refer to obstacles that hinder the effective exchange of ideas, information, or emotions between individuals or groups. In discourse analysis, communication barriers are examined to understand how language, power dynamics, social norms, and cultural differences interfere with mutual understanding and successful interaction. These barriers can manifest in various forms, including linguistic mismatches, power imbalances, misinterpretation, and the use of jargon. By analyzing how these barriers arise in different discursive contexts, researchers can uncover the challenges that limit effective communication and contribute to misunderstandings, conflict, or exclusion. Discourse analysis of communication barriers involves investigating how language use, discourse structures, and social factors affect communication in contexts such as healthcare, education, legal settings, media, and everyday interactions. It also explores how language can both reflect and reinforce social inequalities, contributing to the exclusion of marginalized groups and the reinforcement of power imbalances. Key features of communication barriers in discourse analysis. 1. Linguistic mismatches. One of the most common communication barriers is linguistic mismatch, which occurs when participants in a conversation speak different languages, dialects, or use different registers. This mismatch can lead to misunderstandings, misinterpretations, or the inability to fully express or comprehend messages. Example: in multilingual healthcare settings, a patient who speaks a language other than the provider's primary language may struggle to explain symptoms or understand medical advice. Discourse analysis would focus on how language differences affect communication, how interpreters are used, and whether the interaction prioritizes patient understanding or institutional efficiency. 2. Power imbalances and authority. Communication barriers often arise due to power imbalances in discourse, where one party has more authority, knowledge, or social status than the other. These power dynamics can prevent open communication, as the less powerful participant may feel intimidated, hesitant to speak, or unable to challenge the authority of the other party. Example: in classroom settings, students may feel reluctant to ask questions or challenge the teacher's views due to the perceived authority of the instructor. Discourse analysis would explore how power dynamics shape the flow of communication, whether students' voices are marginalized, and how the teacher's language either reinforces or mitigates these power imbalances. 3. Use of jargon and technical language. The use of jargon and technical language can create communication barriers by making it difficult for non-experts to understand the content of the conversation. Jargon may be used intentionally to assert expertise or unintentionally, reflecting the speaker's habitual use of specialized language. Example: in legal or medical consultations, professionals often use technical terms that laypeople may not understand, such as informed consent or prognosis. Discourse analysis would examine how the use of technical language affects the layperson's understanding, the extent to which jargon is explained, and whether this creates unequal power dynamics between professionals and clients or patients. 4. Cultural differences. Cultural barriers in communication occur when participants come from different cultural backgrounds and have distinct norms, values, or communication styles. These differences can lead to misunderstandings, as what is considered polite, respectful, or appropriate in one culture may be interpreted differently in another. Example: in international business meetings, participants from different cultural backgrounds may have conflicting expectations about directness, formality, or nonverbal cues such as eye contact or gestures. Discourse analysis would explore how these cultural differences manifest in language use, how misunderstandings arise, and what strategies, such as clarifications or mediation, are used to overcome these barriers. 5. Nonverbal communication barriers. In addition to verbal language, nonverbal communication, such as gestures, body language, facial expressions, and tone, can either support or hinder understanding. Misinterpretation of nonverbal cues can create communication barriers, especially in cross-cultural contexts where gestures and expressions may carry different meanings. Example: in a healthcare consultation, a patient might interpret a provider's lack of eye contact as disinterest, while the provider may believe that maintaining distance shows respect for the patient's privacy. Discourse analysis would focus on how nonverbal signals are used and interpreted, and how they either facilitate or disrupt the communication process. 6. Emotional barriers. Emotional barriers occur when individuals' feelings, such as anxiety, anger, or fear, interfere with their ability to communicate effectively. These emotions may prevent participants from listening carefully, expressing themselves clearly, or engaging openly with others. Example: in conflict resolution settings, participants may feel too angry or defensive to communicate their concerns in a constructive manner. Discourse analysis would explore how emotional states influence the language used, how the tone of the conversation shifts, and what linguistic strategies are employed to manage or diffuse emotional tension. 7. Cognitive barriers. Cognitive barriers arise when participants in communication have different levels of knowledge, expertise, or cognitive abilities, making it difficult for them to understand each other. This can occur when the speaker assumes that the listener shares the same background knowledge or when the complexity of information exceeds the listener's cognitive capacity. Example: in educational settings, a teacher might explain a complex scientific concept using terminology that is too advanced for younger students, creating a cognitive barrier to understanding. Discourse analysis would examine how language and knowledge gaps are managed in such settings and whether the teacher uses strategies like rephrasing or simplifying explanations to bridge the gap. 8. Misinterpretation and ambiguity. Communication barriers can also arise from ambiguity or misinterpretation, where the intended meaning of a message is unclear or misunderstood by the listener. This can result from vague language, unclear instructions, or different interpretations of words and phrases. Example: in workplace communication, an email from a manager that says, "Please complete this task as soon as possible," might be interpreted differently by employees. Some may understand it as an urgent request, while others may see it as a general instruction. Discourse analysis would explore how ambiguous language creates communication challenges and how clarification or feedback is used to resolve misunderstandings. Methods for analyzing communication barriers in discourse analysis. 1. Conversation analysis. Conversation analysis is a method used to examine the structure of communication in real-time interactions, focusing on turn-taking, pauses, interruptions, and repair strategies. It is particularly useful for identifying communication barriers that arise during conversations and for analyzing how participants attempt to overcome these barriers. Example: in analyzing doctor-patient interactions, conversation analysis might reveal how patients struggle to ask questions or express concerns due to frequent interruptions by the doctor. The analysis would investigate how these interruptions function as a barrier to open communication and whether the doctor uses strategies to repair or address the communication breakdown. 2. Critical discourse analysis, CDA. Critical discourse analysis, CDA, is a method used to explore how power relations and social inequalities influence communication. CDA focuses on how language reflects and perpetuates power imbalances, and how these imbalances create communication barriers for marginalized groups. Example: a CDA of government communications about public health initiatives might reveal how technical language and bureaucratic tone exclude lower-income populations with limited health literacy. The analysis would focus on how this language reinforces social inequality by limiting access to important health information. 3. Framing analysis. Framing analysis is used to explore how specific language choices influence how communication is understood. This method can reveal how certain frames create barriers to communication by shaping how participants perceive and respond to messages. Example: in political discourse, a politician might frame a policy debate in highly polarized terms, such as us versus them, which can alienate certain groups and hinder constructive dialogue. Discourse analysis would examine how the framing creates communication barriers by reinforcing divisions and limiting the possibility for compromise or mutual understanding. 4. Ethnographic discourse analysis. Ethnographic discourse analysis involves studying communication in its social and cultural context. This method is particularly useful for understanding how cultural differences contribute to communication barriers and how these barriers are navigated in specific social settings. Example: an ethnographic discourse analysis of a multicultural workplace might examine how language barriers between workers from different linguistic backgrounds affect teamwork and productivity. The analysis would focus on how these barriers are managed through language use, workplace norms, and organizational practices. Examples of communication barriers in discourse analysis. Example 1. Doctor-patient interactions in multilingual settings. In multilingual healthcare settings, communication barriers often arise when doctors and patients speak different languages or dialects. Discourse analysis of these interactions might reveal how patients' descriptions of symptoms are misunderstood or how doctors' medical advice is unclear due to linguistic differences. The analysis would focus on how interpreters are used, or not used, whether medical jargon is explained in simple terms, and how these factors affect the quality of care. Example 2. Power dynamics in legal consultations. In legal consultations, power imbalances between lawyers and clients can create communication barriers, particularly if the client feels intimidated or is unfamiliar with legal terminology. Discourse analysis would examine how lawyers' use of technical language, rapid speech, or formal tone reinforces these barriers, making it difficult for clients to fully engage in the conversation or understand their legal options. Example 3. Cultural barriers in international diplomacy. In international diplomacy, communication barriers often arise from cultural differences in communication styles, such as levels of formality, directness, and the use of nonverbal cues. Discourse analysis might focus on how misunderstandings occur due to conflicting cultural expectations, and how diplomats navigate these barriers through clarifications, negotiations, and the use of interpreters. Example 4. Cognitive barriers in classroom interactions. In classroom settings, cognitive barriers often arise when teachers use language or concepts that are too advanced for their students. Discourse analysis might reveal how students struggle to engage with the material due to unfamiliar terminology or complex sentence structures. The analysis would explore how teachers address, or fail to address, these barriers by simplifying language, using analogies, or rephrasing explanations. Challenges in analyzing communication barriers through discourse. 1. Multi-layered nature of barriers. Communication barriers often involve multiple overlapping factors, such as language, power, and culture, which can be difficult to disentangle. Discourse analysts must carefully examine how these different elements interact to create barriers and how participants navigate them in real time. 2. Implicit barriers. Many communication barriers are implicit and may not be immediately visible in the language used. Discourse analysts must look beyond surface-level communication to identify underlying factors such as power dynamics, cultural expectations, or unspoken social norms that contribute to communication breakdowns. 3. Contextual variability. Communication barriers are often context-dependent, meaning that a barrier that exists in one setting may not apply in another. Discourse analysts must be attuned to the specific social, cultural, and institutional contexts in which communication takes place to fully understand the nature of the barriers. Conclusion. Communication barriers are a significant challenge in many social, professional, and institutional settings, and discourse analysis provides valuable insights into how these barriers arise and how they affect interactions. By examining linguistic mismatches, power imbalances, cultural differences, the use of jargon, and other factors, discourse analysts can uncover the complex dynamics that hinder effective communication. Whether analyzing doctor-patient interactions, legal consultations, classroom communication, or international diplomacy, discourse analysis helps reveal how language both reflects and perpetuates barriers, and how these barriers can be overcome to foster clearer, more inclusive communication. Frequently asked questions. What are communication barriers in discourse analysis? In discourse analysis, communication barriers are obstacles in conversation caused by language use, power dynamics, cultural differences, and other social factors. These barriers disrupt effective communication, leading to misunderstandings or exclusion. How does linguistic mismatch act as a communication barrier? Linguistic mismatches occur when conversation participants use different languages or dialects, which can lead to misinterpretation and a lack of clarity. Discourse analysis investigates how such mismatches affect communication, especially in multilingual contexts like healthcare or education. What role do power imbalances play in communication barriers? Power imbalances, where one participant holds more authority or expertise, can inhibit open dialogue. In educational or legal settings, for example, discourse analysis examines how authority figures control the interaction and how this limits the less powerful party's engagement. How does jargon create communication barriers? The use of technical language or jargon can make it difficult for non-experts to understand a message, often excluding them from full participation. Discourse analysis looks at how jargon is used to assert expertise and how it may prevent mutual understanding, particularly in professional contexts. In what ways do cultural differences create communication barriers? Cultural norms around formality, directness, and nonverbal cues can lead to misunderstandings between people from different backgrounds. Discourse analysis explores how these differences impact communication in international diplomacy, business, and multicultural interactions. How are nonverbal cues analyzed in communication barriers? Nonverbal signals, such as gestures, facial expressions, and eye contact, carry different meanings across cultures. Discourse analysis examines how misinterpretations of these cues affect communication, especially in settings where nonverbal communication is essential. What are cognitive barriers, and how do they hinder communication? Cognitive barriers occur when differences in knowledge or cognitive abilities interfere with understanding. In educational contexts, for example, discourse analysis examines how teachers adjust or fail to adjust their language to make information accessible to students. How does framing analysis address communication barriers? Framing analysis studies how certain frames or language choices shape understanding and can create barriers. For instance, highly polarized political frames may limit dialogue by alienating or excluding opposing viewpoints. How does critical discourse analysis, CDA, examine communication barriers? CDA focuses on power relations and social inequalities in communication, analyzing how language can both reflect and reinforce these inequalities. This method uncovers barriers that prevent marginalized groups from participating fully in discourse. What challenges arise in analyzing communication barriers in discourse? Analyzing communication barriers is complex due to overlapping factors, e.g., power, language, culture, implicit barriers, and the context-dependent nature of communication. Discourse analysts must carefully account for these elements to capture the full scope of barriers in interactions.